All right, folks, we do have study guide day today. We're going to prepare for the unit test, which is tomorrow. Warm-up question was, what were the two most challenging questions on the study guide? Something you couldn't find, something you're confused about. So I just want to kick it off and let you guys sort of ask some questions, and we'll go over these. When the questions stop coming, then it's just going to be independent practice quiz. The practice quizzes and tests we have made available for you in the classroom. So who would like to start? What's one that you haven't found? Haley, go ahead. Number 7. All right. What agreement did Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin come to at the Yalta Conference? This was the post-war division of Germany into 4 distinct zones, with each one of the victors, the Allied victors, United States, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, all getting a quadrant of Germany. Agreed at the Yalta Conference. Who's next?
Easy number 23.
Hiram, put your phone out, get your study guide out. I'm serious. What are you doing? Come on, man. What number?
I said can you do number 23?
Yeah. How did the GI Bill impact the economy? This was generous loans, sometimes just straight up money, given to returning World War II veterans coming home from the war, loans and money to start businesses, buy homes very easily, easy path to home ownership, and then free money to attend school. All of those things are beneficial to the economy. What next? 37. What event brought the U.S. and the Soviet Union to the brink of nuclear war? We studied that yesterday. It's the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. Soviets had staged a bunch of medium-range ballistic missiles in Cuba, and we came very close to a nuclear confrontation with the Soviet Union in October 1962. Elijah?
Is there a spelling mistake for because it's
Yes, there is. That's a typo. It says Bracero program. It's meant to be Bracero with a B. What was that? That was a program that recruited Mexicans to come work in the United States, usually in the southwest portion of the country, and to work in agriculture specifically. And it brought millions of Mexican laborers across the border. That's number 30. Thanks, Josh, or Mr. Bott. All right, who's next? Jaden. 33. What was one obstacle Kennedy faced in his bid for the White House? Well, there were several obstacles. I think what they're looking for here is the fact that he was Catholic, and no Catholic had yet been elected as president up until him in 1960. What next? 8. What did Eisenhower warn about the military-industrial complex? This was the dangerous partnership that Eisenhower thought was forming between the U.S. military and defense industries, arms manufacturers, businesses that made equipment for wars, like ammunition, guns, bombs, artillery. He thought that it was creating an incentive for the United States to perpetually or kind of constantly be at war. There was financial incentive for that with the growing military-industrial complex. Obviously, when we're sending young people to faraway lands to go die for America, we don't want financial considerations to really be a part of that process. That's very immoral. What next? Johnny. Say it again. 17. What did the United States become involved? Why did the United States become involved in affairs in the Middle East following World War II? Because the Soviet Union was in the Middle East trying to court oil-rich nations, okay? And we did not want to lose oil-rich nations in the Middle East to the Soviet Union. Erica? 10. What did the U.S. do after the fall of China to the communists? So 1949, Mao Zedong leads a successful communist revolution in China. At that point, we lose them as an ally. China was our big ally in Asia, big powerful ally. So what we try to do is we try to really prop up Japan. Remember, we sort of controlled Japan after World War II. We write their constitution. We set up their economy. We pump in a lot of resources to Japan because we want them to turn into our next big, powerful ally in Asia because we lost ours when China fell to communism. What next? 38. What was the major principle behind the foreign policies of Kennedy, Eisenhower, and Truman? Stopping the spread of communism. Okay? When in doubt, stopping the spread of communism. That's what this unit is really all about. Jaden? 35. Describe the New Frontier proposals Kennedy addressed. The New Frontier was Kennedy's domestic agenda. So a couple of things he was able to do was increase women's rights legislation. He addressed the pay gap. It was called the Fair Pay Act, which addressed disparities in income between men and women in the workplace. And then he also did a lot for disabled people. He passed a few pieces of legislation which increased the rights of both mentally and physically disabled people in the United States. He wanted to do a lot more. He wanted to do these progressive things. I believe he attempted to nationalize healthcare, where everybody would get free health insurance. However, a lot of his more progressive policies were actually shot down because even though Democrats, which he was a Democrat, controlled the Senate and the House, so ideally these things should have passed, but there were many Southern Democrats who were very conservative. And eventually these Southern Democrats, the Dixiecrats, would leave the party and become Republican, but they were voting against a lot of Kennedy's more progressive pieces of legislation. So a lot of the New Frontier, his kind of program, wasn't allowed to pass. It didn't make it through Congress. What next? Patrick, you got one? Anything that's empty on there? 45. What were some of the key electoral reforms made by the Warren Court? So again, Warren was the Supreme Court Justice during the Kennedy administration, during the Eisenhower administration. He did a lot of he was a very liberal, progressive judge. He abolished the poll tax. That was one of the big electoral reforms. So this was good for poor people because a poll tax sort of dissuaded impoverished people from voting. If you have to pay money just to go to the ballot box and cast a vote, if you don't have a lot of money, you might not be so inclined to do that. And then he also, the other big one was something called reapportionment. This was the sort of one person, one vote theory. What was happening before this was like think of the middle of nowhere in Montana, where in a 50 square mile radius, there's only like 10,000 people. They would get the same amount of representatives to represent them in government as would maybe Wyoming, Michigan here, where there's 50,000 people in a 3 mile radius. So it was basically something that helped urban, dense neighborhoods be better represented in government, which who lives in urban, dense neighborhoods? Minorities, largely after World War II. So it was good to kind of empower minority urban votes. That's apportionment, or reapportionment. What else do we got?
46.
46, place these events in chronological order. All right, so Bay of Pigs, that was the failed invasion of Cuba, where the CIA trained Cuban exiles, about 1,500 of them who had left when Castro took over Cuba and the communists in 1959. They fled to Miami or South Florida. We recruited them, sent them back to Cuba to try to overthrow Castro. The plot was foiled. Castro knew it was coming. It was a huge embarrassment for Kennedy, just a major sort of foreign policy blunder. That was the first one. So that was in the spring of 1961. The Berlin Wall was the fall of 1961, so the Soviets put that up in Berlin. Cuban Missile Crisis was fall of 1962, so that's number 3. And then the Kennedy assassination would be the last one, that was fall of 1963. So to go through that again, Bay of Pigs, Berlin Wall, Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy assassination. And you can be sure that on the test tomorrow, there's going to be a question that's just saying, put these 4 things in chronological order. So I'm telling them to you right now. If you're not taking the time to try to learn it, well, you may not get that question right tomorrow. So those who are, good job. What else? Number 6. NATO was organized on what defensive idea? How about we just call it collective security? If you attack one of us, you attack all of us. If China bombs Canada, that means the United States is going to war with China because they attacked a member of NATO. Sorry? That's number, what question was it? Number 6. NATO is organized on what defensive idea? Collective security. We're all in this together. You attack one of us, you attack all of us. Coalition. What else? 9. What did Stalin hope to achieve with his blockade of West Berlin? He wanted to kick us out of West Berlin. Okay, this was when, remember, Berlin right after World War II was totally destroyed. Buildings were destroyed. People were starving. The only reason some sort of order was restored is because we were sending in tons of aid. Stalin blocked the routes to get that aid in, and that's why we had to do the Berlin airlift, where we got in planes and delivered the aid and went over the blockade. Well, why did he do it in the first place? Why did he block those routes? He was trying to get us to leave Berlin. Because remember, Berlin was actually in his zone. It was in East Germany. But the terms of the Yalta Conference dictated that we divide up Berlin separately. So Stalin was constantly, and then Khrushchev also, after Stalin, was constantly trying to get us to leave Berlin. Berlin was sort of a ground zero for all sorts of Cold War hostilities. What next? Jaden. 34. Kennedy focused on what issue when running for the presidency? So 1960, the first televised debates, Kennedy and Nixon actually agreed on a lot. There was some consensus. Everybody was against communism, so it's not like, oh, you're totally wrong about everything. Where Kennedy differed was he was worried about this supposed missile gap. Okay, so the answer is missile gap. He thought that the Soviets had more nukes than us, and that was a problem. The sort of idea going against that is there's a saturation point with things like nuclear weapons. Once you get enough to destroy all humanity on planet Earth like 5 times over, does it really matter that the Soviets have 6,500 nukes and we have 6,000? Not really. But to Kennedy, it wasn't good. It was a threat. It was something we should address. It's probably more optics than anything. We just didn't want the Soviet Union to have anything more than us or any sort of edge on us at all. That's sort of the Cold War mentality. What next? Anything next? Any others? 24. What impact did the transistor have on technology in 1950s? This was, it made things like the radios and big pieces of electronics smaller, possible to be made much smaller and more portable. So before the transistor, radios were like these big 300-pound pieces of furniture, like the size of a dresser, that had to be stationary in your living room. You couldn't ever move it. With a transistor, you can make a small radio and you can take it to the beach with you and listen to music at the beach while you sunbathe. What else? Anything else? Everybody's study guides filled out? 12. What impact did Joseph McCarthy have on American society? This was the senator from Wisconsin who really capitalized on the Red Scare. I suppose you could say the impact he had on American society, he's probably increased the amount of fear and paranoia about communist activity within the United States. So he probably made a lot of people worried that their doctor was a communist, or their son's school teacher was a communist, or the pastor's wife was a communist, whatever. Playing on people's fears, paranoias, and resentments. Very effective. Johnny? 20. How did William Levitt contribute to the growth of the suburbs? This is a guy who sort of brought the assembly line techniques to home building. So he'd buy a big empty field and say, okay, we're going to build 500 of the same type of house, and we're gonna get these guys out here, and they're all gonna have one portion of the house building process that they work on, and this is gonna be an efficient machine. So basically what it was is they were able to build a lot of houses right next to each other very quickly. And this was important because after World War II, what do we have? Returning veterans coming home with the GI Bill. They've got millions of people who are ready to buy a house in the late 40s. So we needed a lot of houses built in a hurry. And this is why we get the suburbs, and Levitt's techniques sort of made this possible. Being able to build a bunch of houses really quickly. What else? Did I say hand up or no? No hand up, you good? Study guide's filled out? Nothing else tricking us? Hyro, you good? How's your study guide? You feeling good? Jaden? 36. What did the Warren Commission determine about the Kennedy assassination? Okay, so after JFK is assassinated, there's all these theories, a lot of them straight up conspiracy theories, but however, there is some physics on the crime scene that suggested perhaps, just looking at the trajectory of the bullets, speed of the bullets, where they landed, all that, that maybe more than one person was involved. Maybe there was a second or third shooter. The Warren Commission is a big investigation after the fact. What does it determine? That Lee Harvey Oswald, the guy who killed Kennedy, acted alone. Planned it alone, acted alone. The assassination of JFK was the work and idea of one man. That's what the Warren Commission determined. Now, do people buy that to this day? No, a lot of people think there's more to it. Okay. What else? 28. Describe the beatniks of the 1950s. Kind of an anti-consumerist movement. Remember, 1950s kind of culture largely defined by consumerism and sort of identifying with material things you own. The beatniks were sort of artists, poets, and kind of people who rebelled against the consumer-driven society of the 1950s. They thought there's more to life, okay, than getting a new car or a new pair of jeans. Which one?
Hippies.
Yeah, they became the hippie. Beatniks sort of predated the hippies and sort of became the counterculture movement in 1960s and 70s. Yeah. Anybody else?
43.
I'll get you next. 43. 43. Is that what you said? 43 is what were the key areas the Warren Court focused on. So there was the election stuff, apportionment and polls tax, and then the big one was civil rights related to law enforcement. Sort of your civil rights with dealing with law enforcement. What cops can do with you, what the court system can do with you, okay? That was the big one that Warren focused on. And, Eileen, you had one? 39. Why did the Soviets build the Berlin Wall? Because East Berliners were fleeing in large numbers to West Berlin. The average Berliner would rather live in West Berlin under sort of the American sphere of influence than East Berlin, where things were quite a bit more strict under the communist regime. Which one? 33. What was one obstacle Kennedy faced in his bid for the White House? His religion. He was Catholic. Hadn't had a Catholic president yet. Any others? How are we doing? Are our study guides pretty filled out now? Yeah?
So, we're not doing every single question like we did last time?
No, I'm just taking questions. I mean, we can do them if we get to all of them. Yeah? You have any that are not filled out?
I mean, I have a lot. That's
Are you filling them out as I'm going through? Well, ask a question.
one.
One? I love it. After World War II, the Soviet Union quickly took control of what countries? You're going to say Eastern Europe. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary. Eastern Europe, though, is probably what will be on the test. What next? So surprising. This is so tough. Describe the Cold War in one sentence summary. I mean,
Soviets trying to stop the spread of communism.
yeah, basically it's trying to stop the spread of communism, but just a series of sort of tensions and confrontations between us and the Soviet Union that never evolve into actual war. Okay, but kind of political, economic tensions. Okay, that put us on the cusp of war, but never actually end up there. A lot of people refer to it as a war of ideologies. Okay, what next? Should I just go brinksmanship? Let me go 3, brinksmanship. Anybody want to try to answer that one? What's brinksmanship? What's that? Patrick's got it.
Pushing an extreme situation close to a dangerous point.
Yeah. So it's part of the massive retaliation strategy with Eisenhower, where we're threatening the use of nuclear weapons or war on some country, but you have to make it actually seem like you're going to do it. You can't just make an empty threat. You have to take actions that actually put us close to war, so they get the idea that, okay, they actually mean business. It's dangerous because you are putting yourself close to war, but it's effective because the other side will back down, especially when you have nukes and they don't. What next, Vanessa? Describe the Truman Doctrine. Truman Doctrine was military aid to countries that were under threat of a communist takeover. First came up with the instances of Greece and Turkey. We gave Greece and Turkey money to repel communist threat militarily. It's different than the Marshall Plan, and that the Truman Doctrine was just military aid. So it's money spent, it's military supplies, things like ammunition, bombs. It's a lot of money, but it's not just pure money. The Marshall Plan was just pure economic aid. It wasn't military aid to Europe. That's the difference.
It was money for them to do what?
Truman Doctrine was providing military aid to countries who were under threat of a communist takeover. Like there were communist forces in that country trying to take over the government, so we would give the government military aid, military equipment, kind of like what we're doing in Ukraine now, to repel those attacks so they wouldn't fall to communism. Yes? 40. What were the results of the Cuban Missile Crisis? Well, we pulled our nukes out of Turkey that were right there pointing at the Soviet Union. They pulled their nukes out of Cuba that were right there pointing to us. And we gave an assurance, a promise that we wouldn't invade Cuba. 40. All right, we still got time here. We can keep going through them. Who's got questions? Vanessa? 11. What happened that led to the Berlin airlift? That was when Stalin ordered the blockade of Western supplies coming in to West Berlin. The supply routes were railroads. It was pretty easy just to block it off. And then what do? We flew over it constantly with airplanes, one right after another, to deliver that aid. Okay? That was the Berlin airlift. What next? 18. 13. What was the goal of the Marshall Plan? Rebuild European economies and stabilize those countries so they wouldn't fall to communism. We gave them a bunch of money to stabilize their economies so they wouldn't turn to communism or fall to communism. Johnny? 19. How did business expansion after World War II change the nation's workforce? A reduction in blue-collar jobs and an increase in white-collar jobs. So less jobs where people have to swing a 12-pound hammer or, work hard in a factory all day, and more jobs where people are sitting in an office with a collared shirt, sipping coffee. What next? 18. During the post-war years, describe the overall economy of the United States. It was good. Low unemployment, high consumer spending, disposable income, good economy. 15. What was the overall policy of America and its allies for dealing with the communist threat? Containment. We can't totally stop the fact that communism exists in a lot of places. We're not going to do anything about that, but we want to stop the spread of it. We want to contain the communist threat. 16. Why did nations join NATO? Well, just the benefit of collective security, but specifically, I think European nations were worried about the Soviet Union, that they were going to keep extending the Iron Curtain west into Central Europe. So NATO helped prevent that from happening. Any others? 14. What was the outcome of the Korean War? Well, it didn't really accomplish much. The 38th parallel, the division between North and South Korea, basically remained the same as it did when the war started. There was still a clear North that was communist and still a clear South that was capitalist and democratic. Jaden?
Yes.
7. That was the Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin come to agreement at the Yalta Conference on the division of Germany after World War II. They were each going to get a zone, those 4 victors, the Allied winners in World War II. What's that? A quadrant of Germany. So Germany was totally destroyed kind of at the end of World War II, and of course the government, the Third Reich, had fallen, so we had to rebuild it. So each of the victors kind of took over a quarter of the country. Any others? 19. That was, how did business expansion after World War II change the nation's workforce? Increase white collar jobs, more office jobs, less, blue collar type manual labor jobs. Vanessa? 5? 45? 5. How did the Soviet Union react to the Marshall Plan? Remember, the Marshall Plan was money to European countries. We wanted to give it to the Eastern European countries too. Soviet Union blocked Marshall Plan money from going to the Eastern European countries that they were sort of controlling. So they said, no, you're not going to take this Western money. We'll do our own economic plan for you guys. You Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and so on. 46. 46? This is, I think I already did this one, the chronological, place those 4 events in chronological order. Bay of Pigs, Berlin Wall, Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy assassination. Jaden. 21 through 23. All right, we're gonna do it for about 4 more minutes. 21 through 23. 21, what factors led to the growth of the suburbs? Big one there, but you could say affordable housing and then the construction of the freeway system. Freeways mean you can move further away from work and still make it to work on time. You can live further outside the city, led to the growth of the suburbs. Launching of Sputnik in 1957 led to what changes in the United States? We wanted to devote more kind of educational resources to math and science. We wanted to cultivate a generation of rocket scientists who could compete with the rocket scientists that the Soviet Union was cultivating. 23, how did the GI Bill impact the economy? Generous loans for start a business, buy a home, and free money to go to college. Any others? 26. How does Sputnik impact American students? That one's sort of a double. Same thing I just said. Increase devotion to math and science. 25. How did 1950s rock and roll music impact American society? It created what we refer to as a generational gap, where the youth culture became very far removed and distinct from the culture of the parents' generation and the previous generations. Okay? Parents thought the kids were going crazy, listening to rock and roll. Kids thought their parents were totally square. All right. Any others? Last chance. 18. During the post-war years, described the overall economy of the United States. It was very good. Very good. Booming. Which one? 26. I just did that one. Increased devotion to math and science. Math and science. 41 and what? 41, how did the Bay of Pigs change the world's view of the United States? It was a failure on our end, so the rest of the world probably thought, oh, the United States is more vulnerable to failure than we thought. Maybe they're disorganized. Maybe their intelligence is bad in some instances. 42, what was the goal of the Alliance for Progress? This was sort of the economic and humanitarian aid. system that Kennedy set up to go into Latin America. It was kind of like the Marshall Plan, but in Latin America. We were going to give poor countries aid so that they wouldn't turn to communism, poor Latin American countries. All right, absolute last one. I'll allow one more. Jaden, it's you. 31, last one. What factors led to a rise in juvenile delinquency? Increased divorce rates. Before World War II, divorce is very rare, very rare. After World War II, divorce rates start rising in the 50s. Less parental supervision in a one-parent household leads to increased juvenile delinquency. Okay, for the rest of the time, I would like you to work on your practice quiz and practice tests that are available to you in the Google Classroom. Haley, see ya.